period is not yet over for President Bongbong Marcos, as evidenced by his very high approval and trust ratings.
Historically, yung surveys say all the first years of each administration daw, except yata nung kay Gloria, mataas. Yeah, so parang
So
in a way,
expected
most
dito.
Filipinos have given presidents a sort of a honeymoon period for a year.
Both President Bongbong Marcos and Vice President Sara Duterte received high approval ratings in the latest survey by Pulse Asia. The survey results show that Marcos had an approval rating of 78%, while Duterte had 83%.
Sa akin, it's about the people also. People who continue to pin hope. The Filipinos are very generous and very kind people. And I think it's about that. First year, pagbigyan natin.
On this day last year, around this time, the Unity Presidential and Vice Presidential candidates clearly emerged as winners in the May 9, 2022 elections. The speedy transmission of election results was quite surprising for many, but eventually President Bongbong Marcos and VP Sara Duterte settled in. What have changed for Filipinos since leadership changed around a year ago? Let's find out in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this episode of The Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. With me tonight in the studio, Robbie Alampaya of One News and Ana Marie Pamintuan, the Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star. Happy Tuesday.
Good evening.
Chiefs Day.
Happy anniversary as well.
Ng
Sa anniversary.
eleksyon.
Ng eleksyon, oo.
So, exactly a year ago.
Medyo, kumusta naman yung numbers? Medyo okay naman, di ba?
At saka going beyond the elections, approval ratings, and so on, SWS, however, came out of with a survey. And basically, one way to look at it is it's unchanged.
Oo nga.
On the other hand, more than half of Filipinos still consider themselves basically in the same situation as they were in around December of the previous year, di ba? So basically, yung self-rated poverty stays about the same.
51%.
But as we said in the introduction, the popularity of the president still remains very, very high.
Well, yung unemployment medyo bumaba ng konti na. Well, of course, we were expecting that dahil sa reopening of the economy, no?
Yeah. So, yun, and still a lot to see, still a lot to look at for the next 5 years. It's been only 1 year since the election, not since assumption into office. So that's even less. Ang dami pang kailangan timbangin.
Ang problema lang talaga lagi niya, inflation.
Yeah.
Presyo, ayun.
Especially food.
Especially food.
Most especially
sugar.
And
Dahil,
rice.
confectionery driven yung food inflation Kaya sugar talaga, malaking kakulangan yon doon sa ating ating response.
But that's also something that we should factor in, di ba? Parang how do we break down the year, di ba? In terms of inflation. Kasi up until December last year, talagang kita mo naman, ramdam na ramdam mo, and everybody was saying, okay lang kakagat. But now people look at price of gasoline, for example, kita mo it's tempered a bit. So there's the sentiments that we're measuring also comes at a time where medyo kahit pa paano the economy is opening up, prices are sort of stabilizing. Of course, it's still not quite where everybody wants it.
Of course, there are elements that are local and elements that are international. Prices of oil, syempre, it's mostly
And fertilizer.
international. Prices of, rice.
At ngayon, magkakaroon pa ng El
halo-halo
Nino. Yan ang problema.
Tubig is going to be a big thing.
Tubig, yes. El Nino.
Kasi pati kuryente.
Pati kuryente, kanyo. Nararamdaman mo, mayroong mga people starting to report from different areas,
Yes.
di ba? Parang power outages and so on. So lahat yan, tali-tali.
Yeah, and the El Nino is only starting next month pa lang. Okay, we talk about President Bongbong Marcos and VP Sara Duterte as they mark their first year of election today. The Chiefs will be right back.
How have President Marcos and Vice President Duterte fared on their first year since their election? let's bring out the scorecards of former Senate President Franklin Drilon and Iloilo 1st District Representative Janet Garing. Good evening and welcome back to the Chiefs. Senator,
evening.
Hi,
Congresswoman.
good evening.
In
I
person.
feel like already part of your panel at the rate I'm coming here.
Two Ilonggos, ah.
Oh. Okay. Anyway, I'll jump straight into it. Senator, I'll start with you. And Congresswoman also. Yun lang. Let's just start with that. It marks the first year since the elections. Your assessment of this government so far?
Well, it has some strong points in my view. And I would like, at the outright, to cite the foreign policy that is being undertaken by this government. It is a good, I must say that he's competently handling the foreign policy issue, and I'm glad that we have a very competent, a career Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Secretary Manalo. Yes, and particularly the attention and the advances we have made on our claim on the West Philippine Sea, which, unfortunately in the past, the administration was marked by moves which that raised eyebrows on many of our congressmen. But, let's call a spade a spade. President Marcos has correctly, the steps taken by President Marcos certainly pursues our claim in the right manner. He has not given up. He has not taken a defeatist attitude, and is taking advantage of our alliances with our traditional friends in order to shore up our positioning in the West Philippine Sea.
Congresswoman?
Well, Senator Frank Drilon is correct. The respect, the global respect on a country depends on how a president represents your country. And when we talk about the programs, the pandemic recovery that our people direly need, the popularity of the president, the respect and the support of the people is integral to making him a successful president in terms of achieving the objectives of each department, especially when it comes to delivery of services. We just need to go into the nitty-gritty of things by making each department time-bound, that the president's words will be translated into policies and directions, and each office should be accountable.
Okay, that's the strong point, weak point.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, all right. There are certain areas of deep concern to me. One is education. There are issues insofar as the ability, for example, of our children aged 10 and below to read and write. That's a very dangerous situation. Of course, it will take time, but this problem must be addressed. And I would like to see concrete programs undertaken in order to address this. Because I tell you, our future is in our children. If you have kids 10 years and below who cannot even write, read, correct, understand, or solve problems, we have a very serious problem there. Second, in terms of agriculture, we keep on talking about smuggling, etc. But if you look at the bottom, at bottom, it is the lack of productivity, it's the lack of adequate agriculture produce that encourages smuggling because we impose high tariff to protect the local producers. Then it becomes very attractive to smuggle. And then the third is in the area of Janet here, and that is health. Oh, my goodness gracious, the lack of health personnel, the lack of nurses, over 100,000. The lack of doctors, over 100,000. And this must be addressed because this concerns the health of our people and is very something that we cannot close our eyes on. But having said that, I must also congratulate the president and Secretary Jokno, because of the position that they have taken on the military uniform personnel, the MUPs. That is again a problem which affects our finances, our capacity to improve the lives of our people. Because if 80% of your personal service or your salary budget would go to retirement, where do you think we will be going? If if your pension is higher than your MOE and capital outlay, you can never improve our armed forces. And yet, this is a very sensitive issue. I have no solution. I'm just saying that I support the President and Secretary Jokno's position that this must be confronted and addressed.
The uniqueness of President Bongbong Marcos' administration is that he comes at a point where we are recovering from a pandemic, not to mention the impact of climate change that has affected our country, which is dependent on agriculture. Well, smuggling is wrong. However, we cannot close our doors to importers simply because if we rely on our local produce, then the cost of living of every Filipino family will be very expensive. Healthcare, yes, we have the exodus of nurses and doctors, but this is not new. This has been going on since the time that I was still a medical student. But we have solutions. There were actually solutions put forward way back in 2014, and that should have continued. There were proposals, there was actually an implementation of a program where new items like universal healthcare implementers and public health associates were hired. These are our graduates of medicine and graduates of nursing and other allied medical and paramedical courses who are not yet board passers, who are preparing to take the board exams, but they will be hired by the government. In that way, it's like a hands-on review in preparation for the board exam, but at the same time, the institutional memory and the knowledge that they have will pave way for them to assist the licensed healthcare providers. This was collapsed in 2017, but the accompanying budget was sustained. In other words, andyan yung pondo, pero nawala yung programa. So, in the whole of Asia and even Southeast Asia, the Philippines took after the United States of America in terms of medical education. So before you are allowed to pursue your study of medicine, you have to take a 4-year course, a pre-medical course. But that is supposed to be obsolete. The president can just certify urgent the overdue proposal to shift medical course into what is happening all over the world, and that is a 2-year pre-medical course, and then you proceed to medicine proper. Because there are actually a lot of duplication of subjects. So this will address, and then we have the K+12 pa. So that has actually compounded the problem. And these are solutions that would need the political will of a president, and we have a very popular president. He just has to use that popularity to make difficult decisions, which will actually redound back to the good.
But going back to the weak points, the ones that were cited, education, agriculture, and healthcare, most of these issues predate this presidency. For example, the PISA results, these predate this administration. You're looking back.
Firstly, if you notice, in these areas, there is no permanent secretary or department, department head.
That one too.
The defense has an acting department head, Secretary Charlie
Galvez.
Charlie. Number 2, in the Department of Health, there is no permanent appointee. In agriculture, there is no permanent appointee. So this indicates that really maybe the president is waiting for the year
which is now.
ban, 1-year ban, which will, by the way, expire next week, May 15.
But seizing on that point, that is my question. I mean, Congresswoman Garin, you made a point precisely that a lot of these are inherited, inherited problems, also inherited bright ideas from many people. So we're not lacking in options You pointed for the need for political will. But before we get to that, I also want to know, in the first year, do you get a sense of the direction and the philosophy of President Marcos when it comes to these inherited problems and these inherited ideas?
His philosophy in the West Philippine Sea, I fully support.
Yes.
If you're talking about his philosophy.
Yeah, on the weak points, on the areas that we've identified,
Yeah.
health, education, agriculture to start.
Maybe Janet can answer on health. That's her area.
I was also OIC, acting secretary for a long time. And that didn't prevent me from instituting reforms day one I assumed office. But I believe on the case of Secretary Vergeire, she just has to be told that will she be OIC or will she be appointed if she stays as OIC? Until when will that be? Because it depends on, she has been given full powers, yes, but I think she's also treading on very thin line because of course, you will be thinking that what if the new secretary who will be appointed is a current subordinate? And then there will be confusion as to policies and guidelines. But
You're saying there is basically no difference between an OIC and a full secretary
Yes,
in terms of
you are given full
authorities
powers.
and signing powers
Yes.
and all that?
Yes.
Wala kailangang kaibahan.
yes, there are vacancies and you can actually appoint somebody. Except for undersecretaries and assistant secretaries, it's a frame of mind.
I can see
Senator
Senator
Drilon,
Your
look at your face.
your problem is if you are not the regular secretary and you try to convince me to join as an undersecretary, abay, bukas baka wala ka no. So,
Senator,
That's the point.
Senator, I'll just follow up on Robbie's question because the departments you mentioned, two of them, one is under the president himself, the other is under the vice president.
Yeah,
So,
no, in fact-
what policies might you want to see by way of addressing these
well, as I said,
issues
the
that
foreign
have been
policy
there?
area, the president I fully support. Insofar as the security area is concerned, I would like to think that he should appoint a regular secretary because this problem of the MUP, military and uniform personnel pension, is something that is so serious that it can explode in the faces of the bureaucracy at any time.
But what about agriculture and education?
Or agriculture,
What might you
I
want
would like to
see?
see a policy which will push our productivity and improve our productivity. Agriculture as a contributor to our gross domestic product has been going down. What does that mean? That means that that enough attention and resources are being devoted to agriculture, and we have palliative measures like kadiwa is good. It gives lower prices from what I understand. But how long can you sustain this? Because in effect you'll be subsidizing this price.
Congresswoman.
yeah, Senator Frank Drilon is correct in that aspect. There are areas, when you said these are persistent problems that has been happening before. So this needs long-term solutions. In agriculture, there are a lot of problems that need long-term solutions because we have the challenge of expensive feeds for animals. We have the challenge of climate change. We are in a country where farmers are not highly subsidized. So do we open the market so that our consumers will not be ultimately affected? How do we balance the welfare of our farmers and that of the general consuming public? And this needs long-term solutions. So an OIC has the same powers as a secretary, very small difference. However, the big difference there is when an OIC is being told, you have the mandate, you innovate programs, and I assure you that your innovations will not be changed overnight if there will be a change in management.
Congresswoman, we're referring to OICs. Let's take the example of Department of Agriculture because the OIC happens to be the president himself as well. Okay, so just bring it to that point and bring back to my earlier question. Everything that can be done should be done on the long term. I think we're there. The question again is, do you get the sense, or what sense do you get that the president is pointing us in whichever direction. Let's say in the case of the department that he chose to lead personally.
In the case of the department,
between increasing productivity, for example, and importation to quell inflation in the immediate run, people were confused when it came to sugar, when it came to onions, when it came to so many food products. People were confused on the policy. Do you get a sense after 1 year that President Marcos has a handle on this, has a vision for this, and is pointing us in any particular direction?
the vision, yes, because I heard him speak about agriculture passionately and the directions that he wants to pursue. However, upon deliberation of the real situation of the agriculture sector, many of the problems are actually entrenched in policies within the department and its attached agencies. So on a point of looking from the balcony, I believe the direction of the president is for him to be the OIC in that portfolio, simply because his presence will be a mere signal or disciplinary signal to all those who are jeopardizing the direction of agriculture. The problem now is whether we want to pursue it to that direction, and if it's effective, if it's curtailing people to do illegal things or to favor certain groups. It's basically a department where you have the president as an OIC, and it also means that the power of the sitting OIC is so vast that disciplinary sanctions can also be scary.
Yes, ma'am. But in that sense, if his powers are so vast, because he is also the president, is he even using them? Because the complaint about him with regard to agriculture is that he's not exactly there.
I have been there. I've done that. The president is the chief executive officer. He has control over the entire executive department. How do you think he can supervise the day-to-day working in the Department of Agriculture? He has to rely on his undersecretary, and in many instances, the undersecretary will be looking at him for direction.
Exactly.
To me, that is the difficulty of the setup today. And I've urged the president to already appoint a permanent agriculture secretary, a permanent health secretary, a permanent D&D secretary, because these are the three areas where some expectations are not met. For the vice president, I would urge that she lays on the table, and because the education requires a long-term solution, you cannot solve this overnight. But I would like to hear our vice president lay out to the public, this is what we intend to do, and we recognize the problem. That's the first thing that we have to do, recognize that we have a problem insofar as education is concerned. And unless we address this, we'll be in trouble in the future.
Do you think she recognizes the problems, and do you think she has some idea of how to confront these problems?
I believe she realizes the problem. She has been reading the data, the reports, and I can see that during the previous budget deliberation. The impact of the pandemic on our students is beyond description. We can even see in the board exams. The passing rate is a lot lower than what it was, as compared to the historical data. And the challenge now is how to get a better slice of the pie so that the education problems will be addressed. We have an increasing population, but the increase in the number of teachers and the number of classrooms is not commensurate to the increase in our population. We have to have a conducive learning center, but many of our buildings are dilapidated. Many of our classrooms cannot cope up with the demands of time. We don't even have electric fans. They have to source it out from whoever can donate for them. But with the pandemic, most of the businesses are going down. And if we talk about agriculture, the way I see it is, yes, the president can be an effective OIC. However, he has to have more generals on the ground who will be given the mandate to implement his direction.
Ma'am, you mentioned kasi bigger slice of the pie for education. But some would find that ironic considering that in
It has the
this
biggest-
administration, well, it also allocated money for intelligence,
Yeah, precisely what I was saying is bigger slash of the pie for the problems that we were pointing out, and that is classrooms and additional teachers.
Yeah, but what does that express when, I mean, the controversy was there. When people asked, as you said, we need classrooms, we need electric fans, we need to take care of our teachers. Learning modules are really a shot. And then when we get a bigger slice of the pie, we spend it on intelligence. I mean, it's just, I know it's simplistic and we know it's a complicated thing. But the question, I guess, is what does that express in terms of understanding what needs to be done and simply allocating the resources where they are needed?
That is something that we need to look forward to in the upcoming budget deliberation. Because that is a question that will be repeatedly coming out when the DepEd defends its proposed allocation.
But was Congress obviously it was satisfied with the explanation for the intelligence funds? But personally, ma'am, do you see the advantage in putting intelligence funds for the DepEd when, as you said, there could be other items that could be better funded?
There is a need to balance the objectives of DepEd, its vision and mission, and the desire or the priorities of the executive in terms of management, the education portfolio. So there's really a need to balance.
Senator, your views, tumataas yung kilay mo, Senator.
You see, first, I am a lawyer, and under the Constitution, education is given the highest priority.
Yes.
And obviously, our resources at this stage of our development is not enough to address all the needs of the basic sector. However, the problem is made worse when you have billions of pesos devoted to intelligence funds, and symbolically, that does not augur well for the people. It does not generate support for the programs that are supposed to be put forward, because the attitude of the people is, you waste your money on intelligence funds, on confidential funds. In other words, the issue on the security appears to be given a better attention than education. It may not be true, but in governance, what I've learned is that perception is very critical. And if the perception is that you are not giving enough support to education, even if you are with the limited resources, then you find difficulty governing. And that is why, as I said at the start of this program, I would like to see how Secretary and Vice President Duterte intends to solve this very serious issue of our children not being equipped to learn what should be learned for them to become useful citizens of our country. Again, children below 10 years old cannot even read and write as expected at that age. This is a very serious problem. And you will not feel this problem until maybe 10 years from now, when these kids today will take over society.
Now, all of that said, you mentioned perception, particularly of the public. If we go by the surveys, perception seems to be very positive. There is high approval rating for President Marcos. There's very high approval rating also for Vice President.
That is why, all right, he has the political support. And therefore, in my mind, he should be able to use this political support and popularity to implement the right policies, as in, for example, the military uniform personnel pension plan. This is very serious. So, and past administrations, including President Pinoy, including Gloria, always wanted to solve this problem, but could not, because maybe they did not have that popular support that they are looking at. But the President Marcos has that, so he must solve this. Otherwise, you talk about health needs, you talk about education needs. you must be able to channel your limited resources in the right areas.
Let me pull back a bit on a more general scale. As we've said, we're marking the first year since the elections of 2022, and we're trying to gauge the performance of this current government based on everything that has happened. The current administration ran on a very, very basic one-word campaign: unity. On that front, how would you gauge the impact and the temperature in the country right now? I would also want to ask specifically, how would you gauge the question on unity, as far as the critics was concerned, was that they were saying, oh no, this is going to be a divisive government, especially with the Marcos there. How would you gauge the unity promise, particularly also through the lens of how did this Marcos navigate some points in the calendar that people had circled? How will he navigate the anniversary of martial law? How will he navigate the August 21, the assassination of Ninoy Aquino? How would he navigate EDSA, people power? How would you gauge his performance in treading that line?
Well, there is no set answers to that. But if you're going to look at the surveys, as you pointed out earlier, it would appear that the people are supportive of his leadership today. And to me, I will not indulge myself in all those talks, but use this unity and popularity, the support, in order to provide solutions to our very difficult problems. We should not miss this. He should not miss this opportunity, because these are problems that will not go away. And his advocacy for unity during his campaign should now be translated into that kind of a leadership which we need in order to solve the problems that we face today.
Unity is a very vital ingredient if you want to deliver for the people. Perception is very important in government service. However, that perception will also have to translate to services. Because at the end of the day, if people would encounter the impact of climate change, at the end of the day, if farmers are having a difficulty in coming up with their produce, then it will affect perception. Where are we now with unity? I believe the President has shown to the Filipino people that he holds no grudge against political opponents, and always had given a reaching hand to all those who would like to join his government. And this is very important because it actually means less obstacles in achieving your goals. And we need to see the fruition of those in the coming months.
You both have made strong points about the political capital that this administration has, given the number of votes it got in 2022. But let me turn it around. Has this administration shown its will to use this political capital in pushing controversial policy changes? For example, the MEP, as you pointed out, the MEP is one, and that's a good point. But what about the other possibly controversial, sticky, or issues that most administrations probably want to avoid if they don't have that much capital?
Well, firstly, he confronted the MUP issue.
Yeah.
It's very important. Remember that those involved here are members of the armed forces,
Yes.
and they are always a very significant sector of our society that you should please for obvious reasons. And he has confronted this problem. Correctly, he
Yes,
said.
sir. Well, that's clear naman eh. The MUP is already there. But what about, for example, education, agriculture, all those other issues where, because you've talked about passion, you've talked about the will, but is the gambling there?
We can also look into the needed political will to collapse abuses in some procurement entities, like PSDBM. It's not that easy to collapse that certain office. But I believe his administration came out strong and said no procurement or no transfer of funds will now be done to these agencies where apparently have been linked to the possible abuses during the pandemic. So that again entails political will. However, that should be matched with timelines for the departments to now come out with a concrete procurement timeline, because if this will also be delayed, then the services to the people will also be affected.
Okay. Congresswoman Janet Garin, former Senate President of Franklin Drilon. Sir, ma'am, sir, we will just need to take a quick break, but we would appreciate you staying with us, and we would appreciate you staying with us as we continue this discussion. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Former presidential spokesperson Edwin Lasherda clarified that no politics were involved in the meeting between former Senator Mar Rojas, former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, and Vice President Sara Duterte.
However, Lasherda believes that having an opposition figure in the cabinet of President Marcos would do the president well, especially following his campaign promises of unity.
Kung makakatulong ang impression na kapag may pinili sa opposition na kabinete, maganda rin yun, no? Yan ang pangako ni Pangulong Marcos na unity.
Welcome back. Still with us, former Senate President Franklin Drilon and former Health Secretary, now Iloilo Representative Janet Garin. We were talking about surveys. Now, actually, the last survey showed his performance rating slipping, no? And corollary to that, another survey showing that people think his weakest point is in controlling inflation. Apart from these surveys, more surveys, although not latest, that these were in December, no? So 6 months actually, 51%, same poverty level, and unemployment sliding a bit, although this was expected because of the economic reopening. How would you assess his performance? Controlling inflation, poverty alleviation, job generation?
Go ahead. I mean, well, all those factors we pointed out, particularly in agriculture. As I said earlier, the contribution of agriculture to our economy is going down. And this is a wake-up call for the president and his advisors. We better address more strongly the issue of poverty. And hopefully the second year will see a more concrete execution of the poverty programs that we have in government. I am in favor of you know, we are fond. Of course, it may be necessary. There are palliatives applied. You know, projection that you know, things are going better. But again, I mean, you said the surveys will indicate otherwise. That talagang people are starting to feel that their life has changed. So this is a wake-up call to me, and we pointed out certain areas from where we sit that should be addressed in order to respond to this to these indications that popularity is going down.
Generation of jobs is a good solution to poverty alleviation. And I believe this is one thrust that the president is somehow looking into. That's why he has been inviting investors from all over the world to come to the Philippines. And this should be coupled by the DILG coming out with a strong hand. The fact that the DILG now pursues the intention to cleanse the system of possible supporters of the drug syndicate, and even with the government coming out to curtail smuggling, these are all good aspects for job generation. But again, 1 year is not enough, especially if we are coming from a pandemic. The pandemic exit plan has still to be conveyed to the people. And one of the pandemic exit plan is actually job opportunities, especially that there will be businesses who cannot cope up with the impact of the pandemic and has to shift to other sources of income. And that means a lot of Filipinos losing their jobs but pursuing other jobs in other aspects.
I have a very basic question, if you don't mind, because you mentioned 1 year is not enough. And we always, we actually start off with that premise as well. But I want to ask that, I mean, really, is 1 year not enough to gauge, and if it really is not, what's a reasonable time for us to have an objective judgment and appraisal of a government?
Well, maybe, really, to be realistic, the first year, parang boxing yan eh. The first round, you figure out what your opponent is capable of. And here, the opponent would be poverty, lack of income, lack of jobs, etc. And you lay down your plans, and you are not lacking in technical people who would suggest to you what are the plans that should be in place. But the issue is, you are the president. You should have the mandate to lead, and therefore, after a review of what the proposals are, use your political capital to be able to lead the solutions, no matter how unpopular they are, because we need them.
So that's basically the 1 year is a boxing time. That's true. Thank you very much, Senator Frank, for the term, where you start deciphering the workers from the talkers. Because in the first year, you will encounter a lot of people full of promises, full of good plans, but translating that to actual actions is not that easy. And that's also the time where the new administration it's like the honeymoon period, where you start realizing that to be effective, these are the people needed in this department. So the plans are there, the directions are there, the exhaustion of the possible remedies of how we counter, how we stop increasing inflation are all there. We expect that after 1 year will be an aggressive delivery of actual services, of actual decisions, of concrete steps that will actually rebound back and put the Filipino people to where we should be. Remember, we came from a 3-year hiatus post-pandemic, and it's not only loss of economic opportunities. Much of our budget has been translated to pandemic response. Not only that, much of the loans encountered by the previous administration were also for pandemic response. And this is a burden that has to be carried over by the new administration. So here we are, andyan na lahat yung mga yan. Dapat, after 1 year, we are expecting fast decisions, fast disciplinary sanctions on erring individuals or groups of institutions, and a better direction to make government more inclusive.
I ask because, I mean, obviously there's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to, measuring success and performance. And outside of time, for example, now that a lot of Filipinos are going abroad and we have our relatives going to other countries, going back to work, people are sending back their lens of what they're seeing. Like, for example, they're saying, oh, magkano na pagkain dyan sa atin? Magkano na gasolina dyan sa atin? Eh dito, ganito na. Kamusta na ang turismo sa atin? Eh dito, ganito na. And it also gives an objective lens for people that's not necessarily time-bound, but at least comparing us to more or less reasonable, especially to our neighbors in Southeast Asia.
The increase in commodities and prices is inevitable. The increase in fuel is inevitable. We have war all over. There's climate change. However, coping up would simply mean being able to cope up with the changes. Dapat mas marami ang nagkakaroon ng trabaho. Kung merong mga other opportunities for job generation at may mas mataas na kita yung tao, dun pang gagalingan yung lahat. So it's kung tumaas ang presyo sa ibang bansa, it will also happen in the Philippines, and it is happening in the Philippines. But how do we cushion poverty and hunger in our society? And these are the actions that we expect to happen aggressively after the first year in office, where all plans and all persons should already be in place.
Yeah, but that's precisely the point. food prices is one particular point where we are seeing a divergence of experience, at least in our neighborhood, relative to the Philippines.
Yes.
Everybody was blaming external factors. Everybody was blaming the crisis in Ukraine for a long time when it came to fuel, when it came to food prices, and so on. But after a particular point in time, you saw a divergence in experience from countries like Thailand, Vietnam, all our neighbors, and our prices just kept going up.
Well, innovations in the agricultural sector cannot be done overnight. And there is always this claymore of support for our local produce, support for our local farmers. However, the situation will point to the glaring fact that we cannot just consume our own produce. And the government has to open up. Tumataas yung mga presyo dahil pinipigilan natin minsan pumasok yung mga importation. But then we have to allow imports to come in because the erratic production in the Philippines makes the prices unsuitable, just like onions. Syempre, we were protecting our local farmers and their direction was not to allow importation. There were, I believe, 1.5 or almost a year that imports were not being allowed. Then it paved way for scrupulous traders to hoard and take advantage of the situation.
You don't think it was an issue of management, because that's what the agricultural industry players were saying, that we were importing too little and too late in the case of onions, and in the case of sugar, hanggang ngayon hindi pa siya maayos-ayos actually. This administration came in, na magulo na yung sugar industry actually. In fact, he lost his first executive secretary over a controversy on sugar, di ba? Up to now, we have all the imports, we have the harvest, but sugar has not changed. The prices of sugar still very high, and they're starting to blame. We're hearing a lot of talk about, well-connected people controlling the industry, and people are saying it's a bad sign of bigas. So that it's a bad sign of things happening na pag hindi na control daw, it might become a bigger problem. What do you think, Senator?
Well, precisely, if you have enough on the production side, nobody can control it. The market forces will dictate the prices. But because the production has been stunted, there is no competition in the market. The traders control it. Onions, for example, it's always a question of who would you protect, the consumer or the farmer? And it's difficult to look for a balance. That is why we're being, the policy swings from on the extreme because of the problems confronting. So, and again, I would agree these are not short-term problems. These requires long-term solution, and I would like to see our agriculture secretary, whoever he will be, to lay out the plan. How do we improve? How do we propose to improve sugar to make it more accessible, more affordable? Why can it be done in Thailand, for example, when the prices of sugar have stabilized and benefited the consumer? So these are policies which must be articulated clearly. And unfortunately, here, it's quite obvious that the president, as the one officer in charge of, or in charge of agriculture, could not possibly look into the nitty-gritty of all of this. And we have a mess right now. As I would repeat, agriculture as a contributor to our gross domestic product is going down.
Let me ask you now on the side of the options before the president. You mentioned whoever the agriculture secretary is going to be. I guess that applies as well to DOH, the military, armed forces, and so on, defense. But we've always been discussing it, and people are out there speculating. After May 9, after the anniversary, makikita nyo yung mga tunay na appointments and so on. Let me ask you, as politicians, as bureaucrats, or people experiencing government, how much will really change in terms of the options of the president to build his team after 1 year?
Depending on who you appoint. If you appoint politicians with looking at popular moves, you'll never move forward. The cabinet should be composed, really, in my mind, of technical people who are competent, or competent people, and the political support is given by the chief executive, and that's the president. The technical cabinet secretary will propose the solution. It is difficult to push because of Congress, because of various factors, and that is the role of the president. Since he has the mandate, he should push these proposed solutions.
You need you really need cabinet members who would be able to balance the situation in the Philippines, that you have to deal with devolved institutions like healthcare and even agriculture. But you cannot have a member of the cabinet who will be playing too much politics. It's very difficult if a member of the cabinet would not make difficult decisions. And it will be very difficult if that members of the cabinet will deflect decision making to the president. It's the buck stops before the executive, before the member of the cabinet. So if we're talking about the health portfolio, defense, agriculture, and even all the other cabinet positions, with the banning being lifted next week, there are pros and cons. Some of the former candidates who were not lucky enough to get positions are actually qualified enough to lead certain portfolios in cabinet. But when you step into that executive position, there are always difficult decisions to make. No decision will be perfect. The president needs cabinet people, even in agriculture, who will make decisions that will not be geared towards pleasing the farmers only, or pleasing the people only, or making up just a good perception. He has to have cabinet members who can walk the talk.
Let me shift gears now. Let's talk about the other aspect of governance, which would involve transparency, human rights, anti-corruption, and building political institutions. Let me start off with your assessment of the fight against corruption. Coming from the fact that it was a Marcos who won the presidency, given the historical aspect of his father's involvement in ill-gotten wealth, how was it for the first year?
Well, in the area of corruption, I think it is of common belief that things have not moved forward because of the corrupt deals that are not being prosecuted in the present day. I'm talking about one very obvious corrupt practice, and this is the family deal. Up to now, well, of course there were respondents who were subjected to administrative case, but the criminal aspect of it, people are waiting for that. COA has not come up with its own findings, and therefore there is that perception, and I underscore it, perception that akala ko ba corruption is an issue? Why, until these issues are addressed in the perception of people are being addressed, there will be a continuous belief that this government is not paying enough attention to corruption. Human rights, well, the Tokhang regime is over, and correctly the president has said, in so many words, he said we will not pursue that kind of a technique, and therefore that very sensitive and deadly issue of the Tokhang is a shift in the right direction. What else?
Transparency, or political
Good
institutions.
governance and transparency.
Well, there are at this point, depending on which area we're talking about, governance in terms of foreign relations, so it's well handled. In terms of agriculture, by pagkukulang. In terms of education, I haven't seen a long-term plan to address all the deficiencies. Health, wow, the problems are really something that we should be concerned. when you lack, according to the secretary or acting secretary, over 100,000 nurses, over 100,000 doctors, and by the standard of the UN, we are not meeting the standards for even for the basic minimum number of hospital beds per population. I'm sure Janet here can expound that better. But because of lack of resources, our health system is almost leaves much to be desired. So these are things which must be addressed.
Well, in the aspect of health, the department is to again walk the talk. There has been a lot of statements mentioned about the lack of nurses and doctors. That is true on some aspects, and these are the specialized nurses and the specialized doctors. However, if we also look at 20,000 unfilled plantilla positions up to this point of time, that's not a joke. And that's why in the oversight hearing conducted by Congress, we had to knock on the doors of the Department of Health and ask, why is this happening?
So why is it happening? Why are there 20,000
Well,
vacancies?
the reason that the department said was that these unfilled positions, there's no waste of money because these unfilled positions, the accompanying budget or cash allocation is not being released by DBM. However, when we verify this with the Department of Budget and Management, 75% of the unfilled plantilla position are directly released to the hospitals concerned or even the attached agencies. The problem lies in the fact that I believe while Secretary Vergeri is qualified to be the OIC and even to be the secretary, she just has to come out with a stronger fist. Because I believe the problem there is if there are agencies or there are offices who are lax in hiring people or who did not comply with the proposals to have some of these positions collapsed. Kasi marami nang nagbago eh. Some of the items cannot be filled up. They have new items for creation, but this can only be created if this will be collapsed. All you have to do is submit a request before the DBM, and a certain official from the DOH has to religiously follow this up. So it's a problem of internal management. It's a problem of putting in discipline within the people. Now, if we talk about the lack of nurses, the lack of doctors, there's a lot of confusion in the healthcare system. Post-pandemic, people are wanting of different jobs. But if you look at the scholarships being spent on by the Department of Health, we cannot just spend this on basic courses. Scholarships should be focused on specialized care. You can put on a scholarship training for nurses who are entering ICU, OR, emergency room specialization. Hindi yung kukuha ka ng mga scholarships similar to what is already being offered by other government agencies or other philanthropists. So again, let's look at the services being delivered by the DOH. They're very good in making announcements. But our family planning programs, up to this point of time, we're approaching the middle of the year, but procurement for family planning commodities has not been started yet. Because they're busy going around, the reason is they're busy going around for vaccination. But you don't have to be physically present in the vaccination centers because you have vaccinators there. You have the local government centers there. What is important is to download the support, the logistical and financial support to make the programs active, smooth, and running. And disciplinary measures should be instilled in the Department of Health so that if people are always out, then they should be mandated to stay in their offices if their basic tasks has not been complied with. We have an offshoot of renal cases because of lifestyle. But up to this point of time, no first step has been done to procure all these dialysis equipments that our LGU hospitals need, and even our DOH hospitals need. And the usual reason is that they're still in the process of making the technical specifications, but these are regular annual procurement.
Pero hindi ba dapat nagawa yan ng isang regular na Secretary ng Health?
Whether OIC or regular or acting secretary, it doesn't matter. So it's a frame of mind na baka mamaya iba yung ma-appoint at balikan ako. Because this happened, I'll be candid, this already happened in 2017, I believe, when a new secretary was appointed, and the secretary had to get back at those people who did not approve her travels or did not approve her wishes to go to these areas of program. Yan ang nagiging, it's
Congressman, we're almost out of time.
Yeah, sorry.
To round it back to the just to round it back, just as a final question to the theme of our discussion, assessing President Marcos after 1 year, 1 year after the elections. Just on that question, I mean, we can talk about what the DILG, what the local governments are not doing. We can talk about undersecretaries. We can talk about unit heads. We can talk about OIC of the. But ultimately, on the question of just appointing and establishing a leadership there, that comes at the feet of the president. Has he done enough, and has he set that leadership at least just to make sure that whoever is leading the department is empowered, is mandated, has the confidence and the backing of the president?
If he has uncertainties, I believe it's because he doesn't want to commit the grave sin of appointing somebody who cannot deliver. The OIC has full powers. What is important at this point of time now is that the OICs are given the mandate of, okay, you have full powers and you will be staying there up to this point of time, and then be assured that if you have innovations or reforms, those will continue. Now, on the part of the Department of Agriculture, it is an evolving institution that needs more people. So more generals have to be on the ground, more people who are not only open to hearing the farmers, but also open to hearing the consumers should be in place.
Okay, Congresswoman Janet Garin and former Senate President Franklin Drilon, we will have to leave it there at this point. We will continue to talk about the first year of the Marcos administration in the next episodes. But for now, that's it for the Chiefs. Maraming salamat po sa inyo.
Thank you.
We hope to have you back. It's really, really different.
Just one line,
Yeah.
if you will. You know, what the president has done to me, which is very perceptible, he has returned the dignity to the office of the
Yes.
president.
Yes.
I think that should be mentioned.
Yeah.
And we will pick up on that point, as we said, in the other discussions that will follow, surely, as we commemorate the first year of the Marcos administration. In the meantime, we hope it was discussed. We'll keep the conversation going. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.